Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here. This is the first time I'm speaking at a technical conference, so I might be a little bit nervous. And also, you set the benchmark a bit high with the best talk, so let's see how it goes. All right, so I'm going to talk about my personal experience of becoming a developer after the age of 40 and coming from a background of doing marketing for pretty much the past 20 years. Are there people here who are working on side projects or building a business with Rails? Okay, there are a couple of people. So if you are new to Ruby, my hope is to get you a little bit excited about what you can do with Ruby and Rails. And if you are building a business, I hope you will take some lessons from my experiences. And if you have a lot of experience with Ruby or Rails applications, come after my talk, find me outside and tell me all the reasons why I'm wrong. Now, a little bit about me. My name is Onur. I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey. I have experience working across agencies, smaller agencies, mostly in Istanbul, and I also work at RGA in Singapore, which is a bigger international agency. I worked in some startup. I set up my own little company in Turkey, ran it for a couple of years. Also in Singapore, I was part of an e-commerce startup, also ran for a couple of years. And finally, I went to the dark side, the corporate world, and I worked in really good companies like American Express and MasterCard, mostly responsible for digital marketing roles. Now, for the past 10 years, I've been living in Singapore, which is a city of 6 million people with amazing food, quite densely populated, and relatively vibrant Ruby community. Around 2019, I left my job, and with my girlfriend at the time, we got married. I traveled around a bit, and because of her job, we ended up moving to Switzerland. And we moved to a tiny village of 600 people. And just around this time, COVID also happened. And I had recently turned 40, and the midlife crisis was kicking in. So I thought to myself at the time what every person in my situation would probably tell themselves, which is, I'm going to build a SaaS. And I distinctly remember at this time thinking, how difficult could that possibly be? Looking at all the people who are successfully running businesses, I thought I could do this. Of course, it didn't turn out to be that way. Now, if at this time, if anybody came to me and asked, I want to build a SaaS business, what advice would you give to me as a marketer? I would have told them, first of all, build as little as possible, because you don't want to go spend all your time in a cave writing code, right? The second thing I would tell them is talk to as many potential customers as possible to understand what their problems are before you go ahead and start implementing solutions. Lastly, I would tell them, this is going to be a long journey, commit for the long term. We'll come back to these later. Now, I decided to embark on this journey, and no-code was relatively a new thing at the time, but I didn't want to get down that path. So the first project idea I had was a website for natural wines. Natural wines are a specific type of wines that they try to do it with less intervention and less chemicals, and it was a bit of a trend at the time, and I was interested in it. So I built a simple mock-up in Figma, and I thought this would be a directory where I could feature some of the winemakers, places that you can drink these wines, and also a little bit of community features where you can bookmark some places, save them for later, maybe even rate them. And I asked myself, what stack do I use? Does anybody remember Jamstack? That was the thing. So I thought, all right, I'm going to do it with Jamstack. And what framework do I use? And the most popular framework at the time was Next.js. So I was like, okay, I'm going to use Next.js. So I go into Next.js without knowing anything about it, and I try to build something. And I quickly realized in order to use Next.js, you also have to know React. So I endure React code for a little while. But I also quickly find out that you cannot really write React without understanding JavaScript. And this was around the time that ES6 turns out, was a thing. So I spent a little bit of time learning about ES6. And while all of this happening, about 3 months has passed, and I haven't really done anything so far. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready to build this website now. What do? I have all these great ideas. I want to see them come to life. But then the more I get into making that dream a reality, the more I realize you actually need a lot more. For example, you need a way to store the data. You need a way to access that data and manipulate it. You need to have some kind of authentication system. If you need to interact with different services, you need to use other tools. I said, I'm not going to do any of this. This is too much. And I also distinctly remember thinking, like, why are my only options using untested libraries or paying some VC-funded company a lot of money to solve the problems that have been solved for the past 20 years? And that's when I remember the first Ruby on Rails video when DHH was building the famous blog in 5 or 15 minutes. So I decided to take a look at Ruby on Rails. And the other reason I wanted to do this is because a lot of the small bootstrap or mostly bootstrap companies that are either solo founders or building successful businesses with small teams tend to use full stack frameworks. They are mostly Rails, occasionally Python and Django, and sometimes PHP and Laravel. So at that time, I decided to go all in. I said, Ruby on Rails is going to be my stack. I'm not going to learn anything else. This is going to be it. It wasn't so easy. When I first started, I had some very basic questions, such as, when I look at a piece of code, is this Ruby or is this Rails? Where does one begin and the other one end? The other question I had was, what is a background job and why do I need it? Testing was a big problem. How do I figure out what is worth testing and what is not? And where do I draw the line? And finally, what on earth is a service object and why does everyone sound so opinionated about it? So I embarked on a journey of tutorials and books. Obviously, I read the Pickaxe book. I did the Rails tutorial. I did the Rails Agile Web Developments with Rails. I did the excellent Pragmatic Studio courses. I even went down a path of the Rails 7 way, the Rails way. This whole thing took about 12 months. There were a little bit of pet projects here and there, and I was like dabbling in it. I was trying to figure things out. But while all of this is happening, I got obsessed with the idea of writing perfect code. It has to be the Rails way. I need to do things right. I need to get it just right, you know. And along this journey, I made some mistakes. One of them was using PostgreSQL enums, for example. One of the blog posts I read talked about this, and I thought this must be the Rails way of doing things. But the problem is that every time you want to introduce a new type, you have to create a new migration. And you have to define these in your models. And if you somehow want to change it or migrate down, you have to write a SQL query to, so it had a bit of inflexibility. I also built too much. So for example, one of the early things I remember building is when someone created an account, I created an elaborate algorithm to generate a username for them, and that looks pretty when you put it in a URL. And I spent a large amount of time that I'm not willing to admit on this. I also tried to write things the Rail way with polymorphic associations with an interactions model so that people can bookmark and like things. But I thought in the future, if I need to have other functionality, I should be able to add these and everything would work perfectly. The other thing I did, because my natural wine directory and community site would be so popular around the world, I absolutely needed a CDN. So I went down a rabbit hole of how to set up a CDN. I decided to go with Cloudflare, but I ended up quite a bit of time trying to figure out why are my assets not getting cached. But the things I spend ridiculous amounts of time on, one of my favorites is content management. Because this is one of my first content sites with Rails, I decided to build my own custom content management system. So that also included writing a lot of controllers and views by hand that, in hindsight, did not need to be written. Eventually, this became so annoying, and I realized my original content was living in an Airtable somewhere. So I thought to myself, why don't I just keep everything in Airtable and build a simple rake task that pulls in all the data from Airtable, and every time I update something, I can just repopulate the database. It sounded great in theory, but it created a new problem. Now my data lives in two separate databases, which is absolutely pointless. Eventually, I managed to launch the website. And it had the user authentication. It had a basic functionality to like places or bookmark places. And this whole thing took a couple of months. And as you can expect, the launch went nowhere. Nobody came to the website. There was no traffic. And in hindsight, I realized I got the order of things quite wrong. Now, I didn't want to keep paying Heroku $15, $20 every month. And I realized I don't really need all these community features when nobody is coming to the website. So I decided to migrate the whole thing to a static website and get rid of all the community features. Turns out, Bridgedown, which is like a version of Jekyll, was the perfect tool for this. So I wrote a custom script that pulls in the data from Airtable, and I realized I don't really need a Rails application anymore. I could have just built the whole thing as a static site in the first place. So I learned a couple of lessons from this experience. The first one is that you need to, if you're building a content site, you need to focus on the content, on the traffic. You shouldn't need to focus on community features for a community that does not exist. The second, and probably an important lesson for me, was you need to pick the right tool for the right job. And finally, I think building all these ideas and features can be sometimes a bit of procrastination in disguise, because you feel like you're doing something productive, and it feels good to see your ideas come to life, but they're not really moving the needle in terms of building traffic, in terms of building a business, or in terms of getting your results. All good. So around this time, maybe shortly afterwards, OpenAI launches GPT 3.5, and the AI becomes available for mere mortals like us. And this was at a time I was still doing some marketing consulting on the side, and I remember thinking, can I possibly replace myself as a marketing consultant using AI? Is this a thing that I can do? And also I can ride the wave of the whole AI hype at the time. So I come up with this character called Lars, and I bought the domain name meetlars.com, and the whole thing was it would ask you a couple of questions, such as tell me about your business, and it would help you create a user persona. It will help you create a positioning statement and maybe give you a couple of business ideas that you can use. When building this project, I had a different experience in the sense that there were some lessons that I used to take away blindly when reading articles about Rails, such as single table inheritance. It's bad because it creates database bloat. You have to end up with a lot of where clauses in your queries, and it complicates things. And also, it's difficult to refactor. In my experience, it turned out to be just fine. And now eventually I migrated to Carmine's wonderful Ruby LLM library. Essentially, I have a single chat model, which acts as chat, which is a macro in Ruby LLM. And all the tools that I have, such as a persona generator, essentially a subclass. So all the core functionality lives in the chat model. And if I need any custom functionality for each of the individual marketing tools, then I can keep them in the subclasses. And I didn't want to create multiple tables for each of the questions that I would ask the users. So I decided to dump everything into a JSON B field so I could keep them flexible. And I used access the specific values that I needed from them. The other advice I took blindly at the beginning was that your marketing website and your Rails application must be on a separate repo, and they must also be in a separate subdomain. And that's the way I built it. I built the marketing website using Jekyll, and it was on www subdomain, and I built the Rails application in app subdomain. Shortly after launching, I had this idea to introduce free tools for SEO. The idea was that people would come and they would try it out, and there would be a simplified version of, let's say, creating a user persona. They would get excited and create an account and use the full thing. The problem is it was not so straightforward. For example, I would need to make a JavaScript request to my Rails application, which then would process whatever, do whatever it needs to do, create a response, send it back to my marketing websites. And along this journey, I ran into quite a few issues. The first one is the cross-origin resource sharing, which I had to learn and figure out, and it was not a fun experience. I realized I need to decide on some way a contract between the Rails application and the marketing side so they could exchange data. Something that I've been trying to avoid doing, and something I love about Rails, that I don't have to think about these things and somebody has thought about these and I can just apply the patterns. I had to now think about validation and error handling on both websites, which kind of felt redundant at the time. Analytics was an issue because when people came to the website and used the tools, I wanted to be able to associate them with the signups and eventually purchases on the website. But if you have two separate domains, that becomes a bit of a problem with tracking as well. And finally, I would have to write JavaScript, which is something that I've been avoiding this whole time. So this whole setup ended up crumbling for me. Eventually, I decided to merge the whole thing into my single Rails application. I had a single pages controller, and inside the pages controller, I just defined whatever individual tools I needed, and that solved pretty much all my problems. I would just sprinkle some stimulus controllers if I ever needed JavaScript or interactivity, and that was it. The other advice I blindly followed, and I think this was around the time what Kamal was launching and self-hosting was getting talked a lot more about, I decided I'm going to self-host my website. And I was using Heroku at the time, and I figured out the closest thing to Heroku would be like a platform as a service application, but open source, that was going to be Doku. And I set up a DigitalOcean VPS, I set up Doku on it, and I spent probably more than a week trying to get everything to work because suddenly you have to deal with subdomains, you have to deal with SSL certificates and all sorts of things that I did not imagine. The problem with this approach is just to save like $15 and have a bit more flexibility, you are wasting so much time, which could be better spent on talking to customers and figure out what they need, right? So I ended up going back to Heroku eventually. While all of this is happening, this is one of my favorite Douglas Adams quotes. Time is flying by. I've already spent 2.5 months, and originally I wanted to launch this in 1 month. So I'm getting a bit anxious and annoyed at myself for not shipping. So I make a bet with one of my friends. We decide, he also is trying to launch his idea. So we said, in 2 weeks, we both wrap up things and launch. And if we fail, we're going to pay each other $500. That was a good motivator. So if you're struggling to ship anything, put some money on it, and that might help. So in 2 weeks, I figured out how to integrate Stripe using the PageM. I still don't understand all the intricacies of Stripe, but it's all right. It works. And I even embraced text enums on Rails eventually, so that made life a lot more simpler. Eventually, I launch Lars on a few social media platforms. I go out and publish them. And a few weeks later, I get my first customer, make my first money on the internet. Yay! And this was a great experience. Now I feel like, okay, I'm in the business. I'm like starting to get the hang of it. And it goes great for a couple of days or weeks, and then the traffic starts to go down. And it becomes a bit sad to watch. And then I realize, what am I doing wrong? And I start to learn more about SEO and the details of like doing keyword research. So I go and learn about Href and how to use the keyword research tools. And I found out this is an extremely competitive market with a lot of good players. And it's not so easy to start ranking for these terms that people are searching for. And the other thing I do, I manually email every single person that signs up to Lars, and I ask, like, what made you come here? Why did you sign up? What are you trying to get out of this? Obviously, most of them didn't even respond, but some of them do. It turns out this is not really the kind of people that I assumed would be using it, which would be like marketers working in big companies or startup founders. This was more like people who had ideas but didn't know how to turn them into a business. Eventually, the SEO started paying off, all the work that I've done on building backlinks, but it took a really, really long time. And a couple of lessons I learned from this experience is that the best way to learn things is by shipping. So if you're struggling to learn and if you have a new idea, but you don't know what's the best way to find out, put your idea out there as soon as possible. And the best way to do that is set a deadline, ideally put some money on the table as well, and focus on shipping. I guarantee you will learn a lot faster and it will be much more valuable. The second experience, a bit of cliche at this point, but I realized the difference between vitamins and painkillers. Nobody ever wakes up in the morning and says, I need a marketing strategy. They typically say, I want to grow my business. I need sales. I need more customers. And there's a big gap between finding new customers versus defining a marketing strategy. And the last part is marketing takes a long time. It's not like writing software where you can immediately get feedback on the results of your actions. Sometimes when you do things like SEO and brand building, it could take months, in some cases years, for your actions to show results. So you need to start early. So now I feel I have a lot more experience and I understand SEO is important. I'm talking to a friend of mine who's doing a lot of work on AI image generation. And we are like, let's build a project together. And I go and do some keyword research, and I found out that people want to tattoo themselves. And we decide to build a tattoo generator. It's called Craft Tattoo, and the idea is that you define what you like to see, and it generates a tattoo design for you in lots of different styles. And from day one, I took my own advice, and this time I followed it. I built the SEO pages. I do the keyword research. I found the low difficulty, high volume keywords that people are searching for, and I build the pages for these keywords on day one. But of course, I made other mistakes along the way. One of them was, this was around when Rails 8 was introducing an authentication generator. I'm like, this sounds like the right way to do things. I'm going to write my own authentication in this project. Turns out that was a terrible idea, because you still need to build up your sign-up routes. You still need, if you want to introduce like OAuth, for example, you need to do it yourself. Doesn't come with 2FA and a whole bunch of other things. So at this time, I discovered Authentication Zero, which is like an excellent library that allows you to borrow all these patterns and bring in into your code base. And I go down this path for roughly about a week. And I also realized that now I'm responsible for maintaining all this authentication, most of which I do not fully understand at the time when I'm trying to ship a product and get some results. So I go back to device and solves most of my problems. Finally, I start to get a sense of what service objects are at this time. They are essentially a code organization tool that helps you orchestrate within different actions. They are additional layer on top of the conveniences that Rails offers. But it also feels to me that Rails already has a pattern that resembles service objects, and that's called background jobs. So I originally started experimenting with service objects, but I ended up putting everything I needed to do in a background job, and that solved most of the problems for me. Around this time, I also experimented with a bit of a leaner stack. Stephen, talking tomorrow, has an excellent course on this, on high leverage Rails for using SQLite. So I go from PostgreSQL to SQLite just to simplify my stack a little bit. And this time I give self-hosting one more try, but I find the sweet spot between doing everything myself versus outsourcing everything to Heroku. I use Hatchbox. I love the idea of paying someone that solves all these problems for me, so I don't have to manage the server myself, but I also get the flexibility of having access to my own server, and it works out really well for me. So we launched this project on Product Hunt. The whole thing takes about 5 to 6 weeks, and it is slowly growing quite well, but we lost a bit of momentum and interest on this project. And the reason for that, and I'll get to that in a second, but one of the best things I did in this project was finding a partner. I realized building a business is already difficult, and trying to be the marketer, the business owner, and the developer at the same time is quite tedious. So if you have the opportunity to find a partner, do it. It makes life so much easier. The second and the main problem with this project was neither of us was genuinely interested. I don't have any tattoos. My friend does have any tattoos, but he has no interest in going out and talking to tattoo studios or getting consumers to sign up for tattoos. So obviously our interest started to taper down, and that's not a way to build a business. So you need to figure out a way to commit for the long term, because if you don't, somebody else who has more interest, more passion, more stamina is going to come and they are going to beat you. So after these projects, we come a full circle back to where I started. You need to build as little as possible, because essentially code is liability. Every piece of line that you write, you are responsible for maintaining it, and you will have to live with the consequences of your decisions. You need to talk to customers as early as possible, because you need to figure out what are the real problems people are willing to pay for to solve right now, versus the kind of problems when you describe, they would say, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea, I will totally use it. And when you send them an email saying that you launch, they say great, but they never sign up or even use your app. Finally, you need to find something that you want to commit for the long term, because this is going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. And if you don't see yourself working on the idea for a long time, I don't think your chances for success are going to be high. So now, having learned all these lessons, I'm trying to put them into practice. A couple of months ago, I went to a conference, a Friendly RB in Bucharest. I found my now co-founder, Jonathan, there, and we started working on a new project called CoGrid, which is a competitive tracking tool that helps you get updates when they change pricing or products, and also builds comparison tables. We haven't launched yet, but if you are curious, you can sign up for the waiting list, and we'll make sure you get a first look at it. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.